Hi everyone. Uh, I'll admit I'm happy that there's such a large audience in for a talk on India user monetization. And I'll tell you why I'm happy a little later on also when I talk in detail about this. But thank you everyone for the time. I understand I'm in between you and lunch. It's the absolute worst position to be in. But I'm going to try wrap this up in around 20-25 minutes. You'll have to bear with me for that. Of course, you can move if you feel really hungry before that. My name is Vinay. I'm part of the Google Play Games partnerships team, and I'm here to talk about the India user monetization opportunity, right? And I kept thinking, even on the way to the venue, that I should have given this a more catchier name. No? India user monetization opportunity seems like a report's name. Which is why I added that what are game developers missing out on. But yeah, I'm glad that even without the catchy name, there is a good enough audience out here to hear me on this. Very quick intro about myself. This is more my work intro. So I started my career like a lot of engineer MBAs in India. I started in the FMCG sector. I did a bunch of sales and marketing roles. I worked at Asian Paints. If you're painting your house, you will definitely use one of those. I designed that. I mean, my team worked on that and led that design of the last one. So that was one of the last things I did before I moved to Google. So I spent 5 years at Google in mobile gaming. I had the opportunity to work in 2 awesome teams at Google. Currently, I work with the Google Play Games team as a partnerships manager. What I do in my role is I consult Indian as well as the top global gaming developers and help them grow their games. Right? It's can't think of a better job than this. What I've added over there is a photo of Pokemon Go. What you see in the background is I don't know if you can see it clearly. It's Bombay's map. It's one of the things we worked on with them, essentially helping them launch in the Hindi version of the game. Earlier, I worked with the Google ad monetization team. I worked with a bunch of top Indian game developers, helping them scale their ad revenues. I was also a part-time UX consultant at Google itself, and I did that while I was working in the ad monetization team for apps and games in APAC. And I've delivered several webinars, talks. One of them I've just shared across a photo. There's a brilliant event called Game Camp that the Google for Startups team runs in Europe. Has been lucky enough to be part of it and share across one of the solutions that I had co-created with a couple of my colleagues. You may have also heard me at a recent podcast called The Deconstructor of Fun. I spoke on the same topic. I'll try to keep the content for this session slightly different from what I spoke, but there'll be a lot of overlap. So yeah, that's a quick intro about myself. So let's begin. And while we begin, I have to share this across. This is, as the Google Play team, we don't share data externally. And that's how it is. We follow a bunch of compliances internally that we need to follow. And as much as I would want to showcase the real data, share across the real data, unfortunately, I cannot. However, what I will try to do is, share across few external data sources which represent the India user opportunity. I will also try to share across maybe a few other metrics in and around the main metrics so that you get an idea about how big and how massive the India opportunity is, right? So yeah, that disclaimer is something that I wanted to get out of the way. And with that, let's begin. So this is a chart. I can't, like I said, I can't share data, so the y-axis can't be shared. The x-axis is date. It's Jan 17 to December 21. And there's this chart, right? When I was looking at it last night as well, it reminded me of that exponential curve we studied in school, right? I mean, it goes like that. Can you guys, any guess what this chart is about? I mean, it's obvious. I put the hint over there, but it's obvious it has something to do with India's apps or games or apps and games in India. Any guesses? Downloads? User base? Revenue model? Okay. I'm, I'm not, I was going to say I'm happy to hear user downloads. I'm actually not. But I knew user downloads will come in, right? Because that's what we associate with India, no? We are the largest in terms of app downloads, game downloads, time spent. We know all of that. This actually is Android gaming consumer spends for India users, right? And that's the curve, and that's the graph that we've seen in terms of paying within India. So 2020, 2021, that red line over there is maybe kind of indicating that it is the inflection point, right? We've been part of that inflection point where Indian gaming, mobile gaming users went from spending time on games, only time on games, to spending time and money. That's happened already. It's not happened today, it's not happened yesterday, it's happened 2 years back, right? That's how long ago this happened. Now, there's double-digit YOY growth that Play consumer spends or Android gaming consumer spends saw in 2021. This is not early double digits, right? This is more closer to 3-digit, double-digit number that's there. So that's the kind of growth it had. Why I'm sharing that growth number, even though I can't, I'm denoted it by x-axis, it's nowhere close to the peak. It's not. You can't have something that's growing so fast being the peak. So this isn't the peak, right? What it also led during that time period to with this kind of growth was that India became one of the top geos for games or for consumer spends on games on Play. For IAP spends, like top geos, again, it could be a wide range, so let's keep it wide for now, but top geos for Play in terms of IAP spends, in terms of monthly buyers, in terms of NPUs. That's all I can share in terms of at least, let's say, ranking for this, right? But it is genuinely among the large ones out there. So that's how big we are. So it's not growth at a small base, because that's what you'll immediately think, right? It must be growth at a smaller base, but it's not. There is a significant base out there as well. Here's the big question, which I'm sure all of you would also be thinking and asking. Why am I showing only December 21 data, right? I mean, that curve stopped at 21. It's 2 years ago. I should ideally be showing till 23. There's a reason for that. So in 2022, as most of you would be aware of, there were 2 interventions because of which some top games got removed from the store, right? And from all stores in India. Now there is a drop in revenue that comes, right? And it's essentially an uncontrollable factor. You can't really factor that in when you are trying to size a market or trying to assess the potential of it, because it does not showcase the opportunity accurately, right? What it is showcasing is that, hey, you know what, there's a slight drop that happened or a drop that happened, but that's not the size. The size is what happened earlier. People don't stop paying in games. India as a country is only adopting more games, adopting more smartphones. So that growth is going to continue to happen. It's not going to go down. If it went down for an uncontrollable factor, which hopefully may not happen again, right? And the last bit that I shared, right, even earlier, that it's nowhere close to the peak. This is a massively fast growing market for consumer spends, people paying in games, not only people downloading games or spending time in games, right? All right. So some estimates. I spoke about, like, vaguely. I showed a chart which had no numbers. I can't share Play data, fair. I'll share across some other data that we see externally, right? I've picked up 2 reports. I'm not saying these are accurate or these are super close to the actual number. I don't know. I don't have the Apple numbers, for example, so I wouldn't be able to anyways assess that. India's broadly, majorly Android anyways. But 2 reports over here. One is the Lumika report. Some of you may have heard that earlier in the day. It's in collaboration with Google as well. And the second one is the Nico Partners report. Both of them are very recent reports, which is why I actually just picked those up and shared it across. One saying that the IIP market is around 500 million in FY23. Of course, and they mention it very clearly in their report as well, it's impacted majorly by the interventions that happened and the game removals. Estimated to grow to 3 billion plus in FY28. The other one's the Nico Partners one, that's showing India's video games market. It's showing close to 900 odd million in terms of game revenue. I don't know the percentage of mobile in it. They've not shared that across, at least not in that exact summary. But 97% of the gamers in India, according to Nipo partners, is on they play on smartphones and tablets, right? So that's big. Even if this was close to the number or somewhere in that range, these are large numbers that we're talking about. Not the largest, of course not, but these are significantly bigger than what a lot of folks would assume, right? So that's something in terms of the size. Now, what happens when you have a market which is growing this fast, and it's also large in terms of absolute value, and it's not just fast, right? It's actually among the top fastest growing markets in Android over a 3-year period, despite the bans. So imagine if that would not have happened, what kind of growth you would have seen. So the question I have actually, and I keep discussing this with a lot of other global developers as well as Indian gaming developers as well, is India the biggest opportunity in mobile gaming right now? Like, I don't know. There's no way, like, at least I don't know of a way to assess this 100%. But there seems to be a lot of investment happening. There seems to be people who are studios, top global studios, who are putting in money, who are investing in India. And it's happening all around us. It's happening over the last 12 to 24 months, kind of reflecting on the fact that maybe some of them have seen the growth, maybe some of them have seen the numbers, and then they would want to invest more so that their returns are larger, right? But let's keep this as an open question, and let's think of other reasons, right? And I'll now come to like the broad agenda that I want to talk about. That was more like a preview that I wanted to give before I start on the key points on this, right? So we saw that chart, we saw that growth, we saw those massive numbers that have happened in terms of consumer spends in India on games. What's happened? Like, and even before why that happened, why is it that a significant portion of the industry may have missed this, right? It's been a few gaming developers globally as well as in India who've seen this, been part of it, but a large chunk of it are still circumspect about the India opportunity, right? Why would that happen? Like, these are some of the smartest folks around, right? And but yet it's happened. So I have a hypothesis, I have a theory, I'll share that across. What's led to that growth, that curve that we saw? What did the developers that were successful, what did they do? How can you be part of this India growth story? What can you possibly start off with? And of course, there are challenges. It's a hard market to crack. So I'll share across some of them as well. All right, let's begin with the first one, right? Why are folks missing this opportunity? Theory, hypothesis I have. It's a mix. There is a misinformation loop, and maybe, I'm not saying there is, but maybe there is some historical bias, right? And I'll tell you where this begins. This starts off with existing data sources. Some existing external sources, not all, some are woefully inaccurate, right? And when a gaming studio, a global gaming studio or an Indian gaming studio looks at some of those numbers in those reports, they would think this is how India's monetization is. It's always been like that as well. So maybe they consider that as the accurate picture. And unfortunately, as Google as well as Play, we can't share the data. So then that gets represented as the accurate size of the market. Second bit is India is top heavy in games. Now, when you mix the two together, as a top developer who's making a ton of money in India, I'm actually quite okay, that it's not really being blown out there and people are talking about it a lot, because I get like lesser competition then. So it's this loop that gets formed, right? And it's, I mean, for the top players who are already doing well, it works well. For some of the external sources, I mean, India is among the many markets. They've sized it, but not really that well. So then it kind of gets pushed to the backbench. But I'll also be a little empathetic to them. It's hard to get this data right? It's that growth is pretty massive, and it's happened over a very short period of time. Now, I was thinking about this, right? I mean, imagine I am part of an external data source provider. I anyways don't have actual data. I'm looking at various trends, various numbers, and they do a great job of a lot of things, right? But if I were to see this kind of a growth suddenly for one market that's historically never seen this, I would also be thinking maybe this is not accurate. Maybe my signals are not that most accurate. Let me give out some kind of a normal conservative figure, right? Hence, it's difficult to forecast. It's even more difficult to validate. So it's hard to get this data right, and which is why I understand why some of these reports don't get it right. And the last bit is this potential historical bias. I'm not saying there is, but it could be that a lot of studios may have come to India, tried to monetize, it's not worked. So they have that at the back of their mind that, hey, Indian users are not monetizing, so it's okay, why should I try more? There's a lot of data for them to look at this. And of course, India is a developing country. We're not a developed country as yet. It's an emerging market. I've heard folks in the gaming industry also refer to as the poor country. It happens. It's fine. I get where they're coming from. But the point is that this entire thing then leads to the same answers that you guys gave when you saw the charts, right? It's downloads. It can't be revenue, but it is actually revenue. So that's my hypothesis on why top studios have missed it. But what's led to this growth? There are a bunch of factors that have led to this growth and led to this kind of a consumer spend. The first ones, of course, there are a bunch of macro factors out there. India is growing economically. It's among the top 5 GDPs in the world. Most of you would be aware of this. There's a bunch of foreign direct investment that has happened in India over the last few years, $150 billion plus. And this has happened across industries, right? It's not, actually in gaming, it will be a much smaller number that would have come into gaming. A bunch of it has happened outside of gaming. And which is again something I keep telling gaming industry folks, that it's a little absurd to think that a country growing so fast, attracting so much investment in so many different sectors in technology, and you have gaming which is part of that sector but not growing. It's a little absurd, no? Surely it has to be growing, because everything else also around is also growing at this pace. And the last point, India is estimated to have that 350 to 450 million size. That's the size of our middle class. Sorry, the dollar over there is a typo. It's essentially a number. Now, why is this size important? There are various ways to classify the Indian middle class, but typically, I have referred reports or I've seen reports where you classify this set as those users that are able to make discretionary spends, right? So their basic living has been sorted. They're now okay to spend outside of that and make discretionary spends, and which is where gaming would be one of those spends that will come in, right? So that's how large that number is which are willing to pay. Again, the dollar is a typo, don't look at that. The next bit, smartphone penetration. Again, this is mostly known data. We have a large number of smartphone users. We're number one globally in terms of mobile gaming downloads. But the third one, that's been the game changer, right? And it's been the game changer, again, not just in gaming. It's been the game changer generally in India in terms of digital payments. UPI, or Unified Payments Interface, has revolutionized digital payments in India. I can see most of you are Indians over here, so most of you, I'm assuming, also stay in this country. So you would be using UPI or experiencing it. But for those of you not, this is essentially a government initiative where they launched a platform for peer-to-peer and peer-to-merchant transactions with zero commissions or charges, which then led to multinational corporates within India as well as outside. They came in, adopted this particular platform and launched payment solutions on top of that, right? It's taken some time, but the kind of scale that UPI has, and these are numbers from the NPCI website, and the September numbers are quite staggering, right? It's almost 200 billion in terms of USD, in terms of value of transactions. And again, the transaction volume doesn't have a dollar, it's a typo again, but 10 billion odd transactions that have happened in September. That's just 1 month data. So there's a bunch of Indians transacting online. This historically would be a big barrier for digital payments within games, right? India is a country with low credit card penetration, but if you have UPI where users are transacting so much online as well as via their phone, essentially you are solving for a big barrier that existed previously. Sorry. I genuinely don't remember my ATM password. I don't remember last when I went to an ATM. because we are just so used to just using UPI and making all payments, right? So these are some of the macro factors that have led to that growth. It's not happened in 1 year, it's not happened linearly, but this has happened over a period of time, and it will continue to happen, right? The potential for smartphone adoption in India is even more higher. So this number will continue to go up. One of the biggest factors, I think, in combination with those macro factors is a few developers understanding and realizing that there is this myth that Indian users do not pay in games. I think they internalize this, that this is a myth, this cannot be true. We will make sure that we localize our game, we make sure that we localize our content, our pricing, and we will ensure that Indian users start paying, and they made it happen, right? And it's not one, it's not two, there are a bunch of these folks who figured this out. And they had this internal myth busting, I think, first, where they cleared it for themselves, and then they could expand their business on that, right? What have they done? They've essentially leveraged India's economic diversity. We are a diverse country, diverse in many facets, but also in terms of economic diversity. In my view, it's a business error to classify all of us as a poor country. It doesn't make sense. There are a bunch of millions of folks who can pay well within apps, within games, and outside of apps and games as well. Gaming developers have understood that, leveraged that. And essentially, they kind of created like a playbook for success in India, right? And I'll talk a little bit about it as well. So those are the factors in my mind that have helped drive that growth. The biggest one being those developers realizing that, hey, Indian users monetize. And I think that's the big barrier or threshold that others also will need to cross. So what did these developers do? We spoke a lot about why this may have happened, what has led to this growth. Number one, a bunch of things I'm going to talk about. So first part is in terms of player experience. They focused on multiplayer games. Indians love multiplayer games, right? And that's something we love playing in our communities. We love playing with our friends, and they understood that. They understood that potential. They doubled down on that and created many more multiplayer games, made their games go more popular. There's a bunch of localization that happened. Again, all of this comes under player experience. They ensured that they localized it for some languages. I'm not saying you need to localize for multiple languages. Start with Hindi, that's fine. And you can then see how much resources you want to invest and go later on to other languages, because I get this question a lot, which is why I'm already answering that. So they did that. There's also a screenshot from, again, Pokemon Go's recent launch where they launched their game in Hindi. And they also optimized for mid and low-end devices in India, right? Again, this perception, Indian devices or devices in India would have very low specs. They're cheap smartphones, low specs, games won't run properly. Partially true, they're cheap, yes. I'm not necessarily sure about the low specs piece anymore. You get fairly decent specs at good pricing right now, right? So they still optimize for this. They still optimize their games for mid and low-end devices, which ensured that the player experience overall was vastly improved. So that is number one. That's what these developers did. Number two, localization. I spoke about the language localization earlier in terms of the player experience, but there's a bunch of other things that they did, right? They did a strategy localization as well. You focus on buyer percentage. Don't focus on consumer spends. Focus on buyer percentage with microtransactions. It's very common offline in other industries. You have this term called sachet pricing. Similarly, within games, there are microtransactions that you focus on. Try to get more number of buyers to make smaller payments in your game rather than trying to hunt for whales in your games and trying to get them to pay a lot more, right? That doesn't work in India. The width approach works, the whale approach does not work. They created exclusive local content, right, for top festivals, cultural elements. Some of the screenshots are there on the screen as well, right? The last one, it's very recent. It's for the World Cup. It's a carom game, has a cricket field instead of the regular carom field. Quite brilliant, I think. But that's the effort. That's the localization that developers are doing. They introduced sub-dollar pricing, absolutely critical to succeed in India. Absolutely critical. Sub-dollar pricing, again, one of the screenshots of exclusive content created at sub-dollar prices for India users. This solves, by the way, the exclusive content solves for one major issue that game developers would otherwise face. If they were to discount their items for one particular market but not discount it for another, there will be that player dissonance. And which is where when you create exclusive content for a particular geo, you've kind of overcome that barrier, right? So that's something that helps with the exclusive part. The last point over there, India transacts in games at INR 30 rupees, 29 rupees. I don't know why. I don't know why this happens. It happens. It is data, right? And a significant, if I take out the price points at which Indian users are transacting in apps and in games primarily, sort it out in descending order, the highest transaction volume comes for, and I don't know why. Maybe it's something that we feel comfortable about. It's something that new users are also more comfortable about while purchasing. It's possibly the case. It's also a smaller amount. But it's sub-dollar. It works. Need to have that within in games, right? The last piece, payment channels. We've seen successful developers promote payment partner offers in their games, on their social media. They've also encouraged people to link UPI on the Play Store, right? This is, when I first saw this, and this is a screenshot of the game where I saw it as well, I was blown away because this is the developer not saying make the payment in my game. This is the developer that's just telling the user UPI as a form of payment is available in games as well as in apps. Just link your account. Link it now, we'll ensure you pay later, that's okay. Or whenever you want to pay, you can pay at that time. Just link it now, you might not even be aware that UPI as a payment option was available. I think it's a great insight, right? And which is where it's, and the tutorial over there is also not game specific, it's just something that helps you link your UPI to your Play account and then make purchases later on, right? So these three things, they focused on buyers, they focused on the player experience, localization, and payment channels. And that's something that game developers have done well. So what can you do to be part of this India growth story? Of course, replicate some of these strategies that I just spoke about right now. Try to do as many of these within your games. But if I were to break it down, and this is by no means an exhaustive list, it's not. But I'm just grouping it together to share across certain items that you could definitely start off with. So number one, focus on buyer percentage. Don't start focusing on the total revenue immediately. Focus on buyer percentage, focus on new paying users, get more users to pay within your game. Over a period of time, that will translate to significant revenue, right? Start pricing experiments. You introduce sub-dollar SKUs within your game. If you want to initially discount one of your existing SKUs, go ahead, do that, see the traction that you're getting in terms of buyers and NPUs, and then you can go around and maybe create exclusive content in the next round, right? My recommendation to gaming developers is introduce exclusive content versus heavy discount, primarily because of that issue of that'll happen with users in another geo. They'll start seeing that India has cheaper items available, the same items available at a much more expensive price point in their geos. It creates dissonance, which is not great, which is why primarily try to have exclusive content. You could start with discounts and then move towards that. Creating that local content, right? You speak to anyone in Play at Google, they'll keep reiterating this. Creating local content for India users is super important. You have several moments in the year. There's Diwali, there's Holi, there's the IPL season, there's the cricket season that's currently also on. So there are a bunch of moments out there that you need to incorporate in your games. There were a few screenshots earlier shared of how games have also done this. Work with local partners, work with local YouTube content creators. Play did a great event a couple of months back, if I'm not wrong, called Play Live. You can watch it on YouTube. It brought together some of the best content creators from India, and something that you could also reference and see who are the popular ones, who are the ones that you may want to work with in the future. Leverage YouTube. YouTube is big in India as well. Usage. We spend a lot of time on apps, phones, so YouTube is big. Data is also cheap, so we spend a lot of time on YouTube. Leverage that, utilize it as part of your campaigns, utilize it as part of your community management, and it should be something that should give you results, right? If you're a global studio, then I know most of you are already over here, but visit India. It's just so important to actually be over here. You can read as many secondary research, secondary reports, or rather external reports as possible, but unless you come here and experience it for yourself, you'll understand the diversity, you'll understand how how people are interacting with your games and hence visit over here and share it, right? The screenshots essentially are examples of localization, again, of partnering with local celebrities as well. You had Ritik as part of, Ritik is a local Bollywood star, he's part of, and as an in-game character, earlier, BGMI right now has both Hardik as well as Ranveer Singh as their brand ambassadors. So they've done a bunch of partnerships with local celebrities. So that's something that you could also then figure out later on once you've seen that initial success. All right, I'm going to kind of wrap this up now. So what are the challenges that are there, right? It's not all hunky-dory. Obviously there are a lot of failures, a lot of developers who don't see the success in India. So what are the challenges and how do you go about that? Number one, it's rewarding. India is going to give you revenue, but it's a hard market to crack monetization. It is. And I believe a lot of markets globally are. It's about how much effort you want to put, right? Which is why in the earlier slide I spoke about how a couple of developers did that internal myth busting first, where they said, yes, India users are paying and hence we will make that effort. If you don't make that effort, you're not going to crack the market. But India has low ARPU as compared to global developed markets. That's true. That's how it works. Our currency is significantly lower right now, which also means that when you are prioritizing, when you are trying to invest your resources, you will have to factor that in your calculations, and which makes complete sense. The second part is very important. You need significant scale to succeed in India, right? And that 10 million is actually much of a lower threshold. You need much more higher in terms of MAUs to work. I know if you're a global studio, the number seems very big, but it's kind of not that big in India when you have so many millions and millions of users. But that scale is important, and that scale is required for you to make significant revenue from India, simply because if you don't have that scale, then that entire logic of going after buyers and making them monetize at lower transaction price point but have higher number of buyers in your game paying, all of that will not add up to significant revenue, right? So it's important for you to have a high number of MAUs in your game. Not all IPs may work. It's a big challenge. You'll have to identify IPs that Indians relate with. You'll have to invest in the local team. Maybe not initially, but later on, you'll have to have significant investments in your teams and build some kind of team in India so that they keep providing you with the insights, keep providing you with opportunities that exist over here. And there are evolving regulations, right? That's something that you will also have to overcome. So these are, again, not an exhaustive list, but some of the challenges that exist in India. And that's it. With that, I'm going to wrap up this talk. I think I went about 5 minutes overboard. Hopefully, I'll not keep you longer away from your lunch. But is India the biggest opportunity in gaming right now? Again, I don't know. There's no best way to assess this. But we have the smartphone users. We have folks at Google who can help you across teams grow your games. We have UPI, which has revolutionized payments. And we have the payers. It should translate into revenue for you, right? So that's where I believe that it is actually one of the biggest opportunities in mobile gaming right now. So that's about it from my end. Thank you so much for the time, and apologies for keeping you away from your lunch.
We have some time for a quick Q&A if there are about 2 or 3 questions anyone would like to ask. Any burning hot questions? Yeah, that's.
Hello. Yeah, we talked about the absolute growth in the revenue for paying users in India. How does that correspond to the growth in the number of users? How much of that is just a product of growing users? Is the percent of paying users growing just as exponentially as well?
It's a good question. So the number of the buyer percentage has improved, if I were to give you a very short answer. So yes, of course, the users increasing has helped, but the initial chart was for that pandemic period, post which there was a drop in users. the drop in users spending time on apps and games, both, has been much more sharper as compared to any drop in revenue. There would not have been a drop in revenue had there not been those interventions that happened. But yeah, it helps to have more users playing, but it's also the width of buyers that has increased.
So what about Web3 game monetization in India?
Sorry, I couldn't hear that.
Web3 games. Web3 games.
And the question is?
Regarding the blockchain games and all.
No. So I'm sorry, I didn't get the question. Like, I understand Web3 games. The question is?
How we can monetize through the Web3 applications in India?
I'm not an expert at that topic. I'm sorry. I just don't know that.
Okay.
It's an evolving space. There is a bunch of things that happened on it, then there's a lull. I'm actually not the best person for it. I can talk to you about how to monetize free-to-play games on mobile much better.
Thanks.
I think, okay, last question over there, gentleman in the pink.
Hi, thanks a lot, Vinay, for this. I heard your deconstructor talk as well, and I was really keen on listening to you talk today. I'm Sahil, and I help indie devs with sort of growing their games, figuring out how to sort of sustain and things like that. A lot of what you shared, the tips and things, to me it sort of sounded like you need a big establishment for that. How much would you say is relevant to, say, smaller teams, solo devs, and how would they sort of leverage this if it is relevant to them?
I think the previous speaker was right. There's a weird echo because of which I can't hear properly. Okay. But I think I got the gist of your question. It's essentially asking how much of this opportunity is being leveraged by large developers with big teams as compared to smaller developers or indie developers. Is that the question?
My question is it relevant to the smaller developers, and how would they leverage it?
Got it. So I'll give you a realistic answer on this. It'll be a challenge for indie developers as long as if they're able to achieve that scale and in terms of users, right? I think if they're able to crack that scale piece, and that can happen through various ways, right? Even right now, if you go to the Play Store and go to top free apps or games, there are a bunch of indie titles out there. So it's happened in the past where they've managed to get that large MAU base without having the kind of investment budgets or user acquisition budgets that large corporations have. It's a challenge. If they're able to achieve that, the rest of it is purely how much effort, focus you are able to give on localization, pricing, keep refreshing your content. I think the rest is very much an opportunity for them.